Hello, everybody. I assume we're now live. My name is Clive Bates, Director of Counterfactual Consulting. I'm here to talk through the next hour or so. We're aiming to have about half an hour of presentation from me on what bad policies mean for vapers. And we'll go into how you spot a bad policy as it's coming towards you. And then hopefully about half an hour of question and answer. And obviously we can take questions on any subject at all. So without much further ado, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, hold on. And that should do it. Okay, which is where we're starting for the day. Right, so what do poor policy choices mean for vapers? And I'm just going to go into really how I think about this. You know, when I see a new policy. Sorry, somebody's just. Right. Sorry about that. Somebody just chose this minute just to call me on my phone. What do poor policies mean for vapers? Okay, so I just want to go through how I would think about this. First of all, starting with the underlying public health model. You know, basically, how does this actually work for public health? Then secondly, perverse consequences of poor policies. Upcoming policy developments and the risks of bad policies. And then the question, what about youth? Because that seems to be driving a lot of bad policy. And then finally, just a quick word on the way I think we should go about this, which is through risk proportionate regulation. Okay. Right, let me get started then. The public health model, I think this is really crucial to kind of understand, is why does vaping actually work, or why do e-cigarettes actually work for you know, as a public health intervention? And basically, you know, get down to why do people either smoke or vape or do a bit of both? And I think there's essentially what we've got to come to is two entirely sort of, you know, a kind of public health model that sits behind this. And I use this sort of basic equation that harm reduction is a product of the reduction in risk that you get when you switch from vaping, when you switch from smoking to vaping, multiplied by the number of people who switch. Okay, now the number of the reduced risk is a function of toxicity and other kind of risks, and we know that there are very deep reductions in risk. We know that really beyond any reasonable doubt. You know, 95% or greater risk seems likely, and we know that mainly from just the exposure people have to toxicants. But the big interesting thing with vaping is who wants to do it. Okay, the number who switch and the proportion who succeed. Now, when you do trials of NRT or varenicline or these pharmaceutical treatments, you basically get people who already want to quit and you make them use these products in roughly equal numbers to the people you have in your control. But that's not what happens in real life. Real life, people actually have to go to a shop or to a pharmacy or a doctor's, get these things prescribed or buy them. Now, that's where the interesting thing is with vaping, because vaping wins in public health terms on this idea that it's appealing and that people choose to use it, okay? Something you want to do as an alternative to smoking, not something that you have to do as a way of coping with not smoking, if you see what I mean. Now, I look at this through two sort of different types of advert. So look, here's one for NRT, you know, and it's focused on quitting smoking, focused on giving up something. And here's one for vaping. I've just plucked this ad, randomly. I'm not sponsored by Blue or anyone else for that matter. But here you can see there's much more of an aspirational proposition. You are doing something different, something that is sort of better than what you were doing before. And this to me is the key distinction in the public health model. When you talk about smoking cessation, you're using a treatment to go from smoking to abstinence that helps you deal with withdrawal. And you can see in this ad, it's focused on stopping smoking and requires willpower. Whereas this other ad, the vaping one, is much more focused on a different kind of pleasure. Something where, you're back in control, it's a cool thing to do and so on. And this is focused on the consumer wanting to switch to a different kind of habit. And these two are completely different public health models, in my view. And what you see is a lot of people in the tobacco control world misunderstand vaping by thinking it's a pimped up form of smoking cessation, whereas actually what it is a pleasurable alternative to smoking. Okay. Now, the way I think about this, and this is how we get into the regulatory side of it, is that smoking and vaping both come at the user as what a marketeer would call a value proposition. And this is a mixture of the different things that go into appealing to a user. So the price, the branding, where it can be used, where you can get it, what the product is like. Does the product give good nicotine delivery? Does it look nice? Does it feel good? Is it ergonomic? Do you look like an idiot if you're using it in the street? Positioning. What do people think of it? Are you doing some kind of loser thing, or is this some kind of aspirational thing? What are people saying about it? Who is behind it? What's the packaging look like? Is it feel, well branded and aspirational and cool or quirky or funny, or does it look banal like a kind of medicine? Okay, and these are all things that go into the overall value proposition. What we've been trying to do in tobacco control, and that's my background in the past, is we try to degrade that value proposition with policies. So we ban advertising, we raise taxes, we stop people smoking in public places, we make the product less attractive, we use plain packaging, we get lots of people to say that it's a terrible thing to do. And we try, with positioning, for example, we try to get it away from the counter, make sure it's not visible and so on. Now with vaping, the idea, in my view, for tobacco harm reduction is that we enhance the value proposition to smokers by keeping the tax low, allowing promotion, making sure it's visible, allowing it to be used in public places, having messages from people saying it's a good thing, making it readily available in supermarkets, vape stores, pharmacies, whatever. Okay. The problem that we've got is that many in the tobacco control community really don't like this. And what they're trying to do is apply the same model that they have for cigarettes to vaping, which is to degrade the value and therefore make it less likely that people will migrate from one to the one to the other. Excuse me a second. That's it. Right. Okay. Now, this model is basically working, and we've got plenty of evidence for this already. And it's not going on through smoking cessation services or GPs. It's going on out there in the marketplace. And we know it's working for a number of reasons. First of all, we have supporting randomized controlled trials that show that this is a very effective form of nicotine replacement. Now, this is a little bit going back to the smoking cessation model. We also have evidence from observational studies that when you follow people, we see that they're more likely to quit smoking. We also have population trends. So we see that as vaping has risen in the population, smoking has fallen at an accelerated rate. I would also add to this, we have incredibly powerful user testimony. And I have to say, when I think about what convinces me, user testimony is very important in this. You hear stories repeatedly over and over again, thousands of times, in fact, that this is the only thing that's ever worked for somebody. And the reason it works is because it replaces something that they want with something else they want, rather than tries to manage taking it away from them. And basically it's what you'd expect. It's a superior technology in many ways. It has many of the attributes of smoking, but with very few of the risks and the downsides. So you'd expect people to migrate to it. It'd be a surprise if people didn't. Okay, so that's a discussion of the sort of underlying dynamics of how this actually works in practice, and basically the starting point for understanding why regulators can screw this up so badly. So here we go. Now, my favorite quote of all time in the scientific literature is this one from the Royal College of Physicians. And I've broken it out from its original just to make it a bit simpler to follow than if I just put the text up. But basically, they're saying, yeah, you can take a risk-averse precautionary approach to cigarettes, but what if it makes e-cigarettes less accessible, less palatable or acceptable? People enjoy them less, don't think so highly of them, find it harder to get them. More expensive because you've slapped a tax on them, or you've forced them to go through large regulatory compliance expenses, or you've made them do much more testing than they would otherwise have to do, blah, 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 made them more expensive. Less consumer friendly, so you've put things in, you know, like, for example, the limit on nicotine strengths in the EU means it's much harder to build an effective, small form factor product that has the same kind of kick as cigarettes. Okay, so that would make it less consumer friendly and people less likely to use it. Pharmacologically less effective. Supposing we make it so that the nicotine experience is much weaker, much less comparable to a cigarette, or it inhibits innovation. The Royal College of Physicians concluded then it causes harm by perpetuating smoking. It means that fewer people will be able to switch, okay? Fewer people will switch, more people will relapse back to smoking, and in the end, we'll have more smoking as a result. And that, for me, is a really good framework for testing out the policies that governments and the tobacco control community are recommending. Okay, so let's go on and look at some of these things. My starting point here is some great research done by, I'm going to draw here on work by Mike Pesco, who, if you don't follow him on Twitter and you don't follow his academic work, you really should. He's one of the most interesting researchers in the field, and that's because he comes at vaping and the alternatives from an economic point of view. There's a paper out recently, which is building up on his work, looking at what happens when you change prices in through taxes on e-cigarettes. What happens to sales of e-cigarettes and sales of cigarettes? Okay, let's not get lost in this, but what he's looking at is how when you raise the price of cigarettes, how much does the demand for when you raise the price of e-cigarettes, how much does the demand for e-cigarettes go down and the demand for cigarettes go up? And from that, using these concepts of elasticity, he has concluded that they are economic substitutes. Now, for the ordinary punter, he has simplified that on Twitter, pointing out that for every one e-cigarette pod eliminated through increased taxation, you would expect an additional 7.5 packs of cigarettes to be smoked. Okay, so that's just the economic relationship between the price of e-cigarettes and the demand for cigarettes. Another one from him, again, highlighting huge perverse consequences from poor policies. This comments on a bill in the United States, but if you were to put a $1.65 tax on each milliliter of liquid, then you would have 2.5 million extra adult daily smokers as a result, once that had panned out in terms of behavior change. The right way to do this is to put tax on these products in relation to the risk. And in my view, that means no tax on vaping and quite high taxes on smoking. Okay, let's take another look now at advertising. Okay, another policy that tends to be constrained by regulation. Here's an advert, again, just randomly picked for views. Some researchers have asked the question, a good question: does e-cigarette advertising encourage adult smokers to quit? And the researchers conclude, yes, it does. E-cigarette advertising on TV anyway causes adult smokers to quit. Ban on these ads would reduce the number of smokers who quit by 3%, and a more relaxed regulatory environment may have increased the quit rate by 10%. This is a fundamental thing. It comes from the fact that these products are economic substitutes. If you're advertising for e-cigarettes, you're advertising against cigarettes. They're anti-smoking advertising. Okay, so what you should do is not necessarily have complete laissez-faire when it comes to advertising, but you can use a code like we have in the UK, the Code of Advertising Practice, that sets guidelines on themes and placement of advertising that reduces exposure to children. And this is more or less what we do for alcohol advertising. You could have a regime like that instead of the more pervasive bans that the EU imposes, or the complete bans that we have on low-risk tobacco products like snus or heated tobacco products. Warnings, again, we put a very blunt warning on e-cigarettes, but what does this actually cause people to do? Well, surveys show that if you ask people why they don't try e-cigarettes, okay, the most popular reason is I don't want to substitute one addiction for another. So what are you doing when you put an addiction warning on e-cigarette packs to try to make a harm reduction appeal to people who are already addicted to cigarettes? You're basically sending them in the wrong place. So, there's research here showing that this is a great piece of research from Sharon Cox and her colleagues. Our findings suggest that the nicotine addiction warnings may reduce smokers' willingness to use and the likelihood of purchasing an e-cigarette. Great, you put a warning on there, it's ended up keeping people smoking, doing exactly what the Royal College of Physicians said it would, prolonging the smoking epidemic. What about using messages that actually conveyed risk communications, but not necessarily warnings, or more sophisticated warnings, likely to be 95% safer than smoking? No product is safer, is completely safe, but this is much less harmful than smoking. Wouldn't that be providing more meaningful information? Now, a lot of people are worried. Let's go on to the next example. A lot of people worried that flavors are there to appeal to kids. Of course, it's not true, but we're seeing a move towards flavor bans coming in everywhere, okay? Yet, flavors are integral to the value proposition to adults. Remember my 7 Ps thing? Okay, flavors are an integral part of the product. Fruit, chocolate, dessert, pastry, very, very popular compared to tobacco and menthol, which are actually in decline. And that's because people are doing this because they want something different to smoking, not something equivalent or similar. We also know that adolescents are not using these products, particularly because they like flavors. That's one reason, but the main reason is that they're curious about them. And this is something we've got to get over and get our heads around. Kids do what adults do, and while adults are doing them instead of smoking, kids will be doing them instead of smoking. So we need a more sophisticated model for understanding what kids are doing. So you have a flavor ban. Let's look at the possible outcomes. Well, the people proposing it have this sort of intended outcome that there should be like abstinence from nicotine and not adopting any other risk behavior. People will stop vaping, they'll do more homework, go to choir practice, take up the piano, something like that, okay? But they won't indulge in any other risk behavior. What are the actual likely outcomes, or the range of them? I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can imagine. And this is what you have to think of as a policymaker. You know, well, people could use tobacco flavored vaping products, okay? They could use illicit flavored vaping products. They could switch back to smoking. They could carry on smoking instead of switching. They could use DIY and make their own. They could buy things that have been labeled, or sell things that are labeled as aromatherapy products but are actually flavors. They could switch to cannabis vaping. I mean, the list of possible behavioral responses is enormous. One of the least likely, in my view, is that when you ban flavors, given that kids are curious about this, they will be abstinent from nicotine and not adopt any other risk behavior. All right, recent developments in the policy field. This is Europe's Beating Cancer Plan, which came out in February. This will go into informing the Tobacco Products Directive and Tobacco Excise Directive. Now, we'll deal with these in more detail in questions, but I'll just give a quick overview. A big focus on protecting young people from tobacco and related products, by which they mean e-cigarettes. Decisive action by reviewing these directives, and those are both already in place, so you can expect the vaping and heated tobacco products to be more strongly regulated under these directives when they're revised. Something about cross-border purchasing, something about plain packaging and a full ban on flavors. Will that spill over into vaping products or heated tobacco products? Or smokeless tobacco products, who knows? Tackling advertising, promotional sponsorship on the internet and social media. Well, again, what does that actually mean when it's applied to vaping and other reduced risk products that could be helpful as an alternative to smoking? Trying to get e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products banned in smoke-free environments, including in outdoor spaces. So trying to get, try to apply the same measures that they want to apply to smoking, to vaping and heated tobacco products. And then possibly extending the track and trace system to all EU products by 2024. So you see there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline here. We'll know more in May. We've seen the Shear report come out today. We'll know more in May about what the Commission's plans are to extend those directives. Let's just take a quick look at WHO expert committee recommendations. We were fortunate enough to find out about this rather secretive committee that hasn't properly reported yet via minutes that went to the WHO Executive Board in January. That referred to a meeting that was held by the Tobacco Regulation Committee in September, October 2020, they're not 21, okay? And they produced a bunch of recommendations, which I'm going to put up on the next page. Don't be fazed by this because you don't have to read it, but I'll give you a sense of what they are. Okay, so recommendations A to K. I'm going to pick out a few of these that are particularly troubling. Okay, C, to apply the most restrictive tobacco control relations to heated tobacco products. Well, that means, basically taxing, plain packaging, bans everywhere. But what if heated tobacco products are a low risk alternative to smoking? You end up doing exactly what the Royal College of Physicians counseled against. And we know they are, because heated tobacco products in Japan have eroded the cigarette market by almost a third in 3 years. It's been 4 years. It's been an amazing, amazing cannibalization of the cigarette trade in Japan. Next, to prohibit all manufacturers from making claims about the reduced harm of heated tobacco products compared with other products, or portraying them as an appropriate approach for cessation of any tobacco product and banning their use in public spaces. Well, what if they are much less risky? What if they are a good way of stopping smoking in actual truthful reality? Here's a WHO committee saying that no one should be told that, that should not be part of the value proposition that is put to smokers. Let's look at another one here. Ban all activities related to the marketing of e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products. So we've seen earlier advertising functions as an alternative, as essentially anti-smoking advertising, and encourages people to quit smoking. So the WHO experts think that that should be banned. That's crazy. There'll be no evidence for this. We haven't seen what evidence sits behind this, but I can absolutely guarantee there will be no evidence that sits behind this recommendation that is even remotely credible. And then final one that I'm going to just draw attention to prohibit e-cigarettes over which the user can control device features and liquid ingredients, i.e. open systems. Now, what on earth are they talking about? This essentially means closing down the entire vape shop industry, the entire liquids market, and concentrating the market only on sealed products, the commoditized products made primarily by the tobacco companies and a few vaping companies. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you take away a product that is extremely successful with the people using it in order to do what? Probably because they've got some story here about confused, muddled story about THC cannabinoids being put in these open systems and that leading to lung injuries. There'll be some total muddle and misunderstanding that sits behind this. It certainly won't be a good evidence-based proposition. All right, now I'm going to finish very quickly now. I'm going to rush through this because we're going to run out of time otherwise. What about youth? The youth issue is used as a, it's almost like child soldiers. They're being used here to force much more restrictive measures onto adults. Let's take UK data. The position in the UK data is there are low levels of youth regular vaping, very low levels of regular youth vaping. Okay, but this is the more important point. Amongst those who do vape, it's highly concentrated in people who would otherwise be smoking. In other words, even in youth, vaping may be having a beneficial harm reduction. It's an uncomfortable idea that they should be substituting smoking with vaping, but that's what's going on and that's what's happening from a public health point of view. I want to rush you through some figures on the US. Everybody went crazy in the United States over vaping in 2019 when e-cigarette use shot up to 27.5%, okay, having been only around 12% in 2017, okay? I want to just explain what was going on there because it's really quite important to understand it. So let's take us that number, that 27.5%, and we'll use that to illustrate what these youth epidemic things are all about. So let's take that box. That box represents 27.5% of high school kids, and that's what generates the headlines. But what if we divide it between frequent use and infrequent use? Okay, that's how the 27.5% pans out. Most vapers are not frequent users. They're frivolous users. They're messing about at parties, blowing clouds, being silly, being kids. Okay, what if we divide it by who's used tobacco before versus who's never used it? Again, you get most teen vapers are prior tobacco users. They're already in the game, and this is an extension of their pattern of tobacco use. Now, what if we cut it both ways? Okay, so we look at frequent use and prior tobacco use, and that's how the numbers pan out. You can see that a relatively small number you would put in the problematic category of never having used tobacco before. They may have used it in the future had there been no vaping, and frequent users. But the most interesting category is people who are prior tobacco users and are frequent users. That's majority of frequent users, 85%. For them, vaping may be helping them. It may be displacing their cigarette habit. Okay, and we've also got to have a more mature debate about youth risk behaviours. This is e-cigarette prevalence in the United States, but there's lots of people using alcohol, binge drinking, drink driving, carrying weapons, texting while driving. You know, these are serious risk behaviours. And then on top of that, you add the real problems that kids have, you know, mental health problems, alienation, problems in relation to bullying or sexuality or whatever. What we've got to try and do is get a grip on the real kids who are, you know, at risk, and they're not the fluffy little kids that you see in anti-smoking advertising. They are, you know, they're tough kids with a lot of tough stuff going on in their lives, and we need to do much more to understand them and recognize that for them, vaping actually might be a good choice compared to all the other things that are going on. Right, finally, I just want to talk about risk proportionate regulations. Only one slide on this, because this is the right way to do regulation of these products. You put fair regulation, not so tough that it really hurts people, but you put tough regulation on cigarettes, you put proportionate, appropriate regulation on vaping and heated tobacco products. So, you know, you don't do nothing, but you do things that are primarily in the consumer interest. You control risks to consumers with vaping, whereas with cigarettes, you're using regulation to try to get people to stop actually using the products. And that's, again, a fundamental difference. I'll leave that up, just you get the idea, but basically tougher things on smoking, less tough things on vaping because the risks are so much lower. Right, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop the sharing, and we're going to start looking at your questions, if I can. I'm going to just have a quick read of what we've got here. All right, let me just go through them. Why do you think policymakers in the EU and US aren't paying attention to industry associations and experts? I'm not sure I even agree with the premise of the question. There are certain fixed views in the EU, and there's a kind of hive of lobbyists in Brussels, the sort of anti-smoking, anti-vaping lobbyists in Brussels, who push, you know, pretty hard in a more restrictive direction. But the interesting thing, and certainly the experience that we have from the 2013-14 directive, the Tobacco Products Directive was negotiated in 2013, came into effect in 2014, was that consumer organizations, producer organizations had a big effect on the people in this process who are more democratically connected to communities and people in the European Union. So I mean by that, the Council of Ministers or the Council working groups, which represent the nation state governments, and the members of the European Parliament, who are the sort of democratically elected members who represent citizens. They were much more open to the arguments of vapers and trade associations because they're dealing with the lived experience of their constituents. And I think a similar fight is up ahead. I think there's more expert support and more evidence on the side of tobacco harm reduction and vaping than there was in 2013. You know, the other side played a lot of outrageous sort of uncertainty cards, which I don't think they can do now to the same extent. So it's going to be a hell of a fight. But my advice is to anyone who's a vapor or a small business involved in this, get involved in a consumer advocacy association or a trade association, because they will help you navigate your way through the thicket of successfully engaging with the EU institutions and how to be most effective and when to be most effective. Oh my God, where can I find more academic work around vaping and smoking cessation? Well, look at the Cochrane review. That's your sort of starting point, and that's this question from Marcus. That's a really good. So if you look at Cochrane review, e-cigarette review, that will give you a bunch of the academic work. But there's much more to it than that. You can have a look on my website. There's a big Q&A section on my website that I try to keep up to date, and that contains lots of pointers to the scientific literature. Next question, calls from the APPG for the UK government to reduce its funding for WHO, especially given its antagonistic approach to vaping. Do you agree that the UK shouldn't give so much funding to a body that fundamentally disagrees with its views on harm reduction through e-cigarettes? Okay, so here I sort of agree that, but I think that is a bit too much of a stick. To me, I think the UK should be just a more proactive advocate for its own views, the scientific perspective it has, the evidence it uses in the various fora that it has available to it. And that's the World Health Assembly, the Executive Board of the WHO, and the Conference of the Parties of the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And I think it should stop lamely agreeing to things that it doesn't agree with. It's easier for it to do that now it's no longer part of the EU. And it should make the case forcefully from the floor for a different approach. I don't think it should fund the WHO to do things that it disagrees with, but I think it should try harder to get the WHO to reflect the things that it does agree with through argument and evidence rather than the sort of sanction of withdrawing funding. All right, here we go to the next one. I'm just going through them in chronological order here. So hopefully I will get to your question at some point as we go through them. PHE has released their 7th report showing a positive light on vaping. Do you think the growing pool of reliable data like this could successfully stand against the misinformation and scare stories about vaping? Actually, yes, I do. I think these reports that come out roughly once a year from PHEs, they're written by PHE, contracts out to experts, mainly at King's College London. They do the assessment, they pull it together into a report, and PHE publishes it. That has been incredibly important in helping people understand what is going on with vaping and giving them an annual synthesis, sometimes by theme. What does this mean for mental health? What does it mean for pregnancy? How should we understand what's going on? If you can't stay on top, by the way, in answer to my, the question before last, where should you look for advice or scientific information? Those PHE assessments are brilliant. If you want an introduction to the science in these fields, definitely pick up the 2018 PHE evidence review on e-cigarettes and the subsequent ones if you're interested in the themes. So yeah, I think those are really important and I hope they continue. We're expecting a big one in 2022 in which they'll go back to the kind of at least 95% lower risk number and where they stand with that. Here we go. You recently spoke at this year's virtual ENDS conference where you spoke of the EU's approach to low-risk nicotine products. How would public health in Europe be affected if they continue down this anti-vaping path? Well, that's been the subject of this presentation, basically. It'd be affected badly. If you deny, if you block, slow down, make more expensive, make less attractive, you use information to reduce the appeal, then don't be surprised if fewer smokers switch and more vapers relapse back to smoking. People who are dual users stay as dual users and don't become exclusive vapers. It's almost impossible to imagine anything else happening. Add taxes to vaping products, expect more cigarette smoking. It is a virtual certainty that the number of smokers and ultimately the toll of disease and death will go up if they continue to pursue this approach. I really don't know why they can't understand the basic economics of this. They are substitute products. And if you make a low risk substitute less attractive, less appealing, less pharmacologically effective, more expensive, you inhibit innovation, you drive people away with it through propaganda or ridiculous warnings, then expect more smoking. Sure as night follows day. Here we go. I watched a webinar from the German Industry Association, which discussed that they are witnessing a marketing ban on advertising and vaping equipment in stages. If it actually influences people to stop smoking, in your opinion, why is this actually being banned? Well, the immediate answer to that is that they don't listen to me, and I wish they did. And the reason I started this presentation as I did was to really highlight the underlying public health model and how this works here. And this is not really understood by regulators. They still think of smoking cessation. They still think, well, vaping is just one of several things like NRT, bupropion, Champix, varenicline, behavioral counseling or whatever. It's not, it's completely different. And because they don't understand or appreciate or don't want to understand the basic model, which is, this is a bit like, having, say, Diet Coke, Diet Cola out there in the market. No one would call it an anti-diabetes or anti-obesity drug, but if it's used instead of full sugar Coca-Cola, that could be its effect, if you see what I mean. Now, if you're thinking only in terms of a medical treatment paradigm, then you're bound to get that wrong. And no one would say that you should treat a Diet Cola as a medicine. Same with snus. We have the lowest levels of smoking in Europe, 7% current smoking in Sweden. And the reason for that is because people use nicotine via snus instead of smoking. But no one thinks that you should call snus a smoking cessation treatment or a smoking cessation medication. It works because it's a consumer appealing alternative to smoking that works in the marketplace. And actually in Sweden, it works despite the opposition of many in the Swedish public health establishment who keep trying to get more and more restrictions placed on snus, even though it's responsible for Sweden's remarkable success in reducing smoking-related disease. So that's the basic reason. The underlying public health model fits outside of the paradigm that the regulators are using to regulate these products, and therefore they constantly get it wrong and misunderstand. And that's the one from that was from Marcus again. A couple here from Neil. Governments around the world appear to be getting more hostile towards vaping. Is there any hope of reversing this with or without tackling of the WHO? Well, Neil, I agree with your observation. This is driven in part by WHO, but it's also driven by a massive worldwide campaign funded by Michael Bloomberg and his foundation, Bloomberg Philanthropies, which is funding large numbers of civil society, so-called civil society organizations. They're not. They're AstroTurf organizations for his prohibitionist evangelical campaign. But it is driven by a mixture of activism funded by a single American billionaire and the kind of, and including funding, lavish funding of WHO, funding this sort of proposition that these products are just a kind of get out of jail free card for the tobacco industry. Now, it is true that these products could become the future of the tobacco industry. Everybody needs to take a hard look at themselves and decide if they think that's a bad idea. I, for one, am in favor of the tobacco industry getting out of the merchants of death business. That would be a good thing. I don't think nicotine is going to go away. It's a popular drug. It'll become more popular, in my view, if the risks are much lower and people don't have the disincentive of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and emphysema to put them off using it. So I don't think nicotine is going to go away anytime now, any more than I think alcohol, caffeine, or cannabis is. I think those are lifestyle drugs that people like using. And the challenge is to get the risk of using them down to a level that is within the acceptable risk appetites that we have in society. And the non-combustible products do that. And until WHO starts to think like that, rather than thinking like this is something you can prohibit out of existence, then I think WHO will get wrong. And I think that what will happen is they've been promoting prohibition, so has Bloomberg everywhere. When we start to get the results in from prohibition, we'll see that it's not a happy policy and they'll be forced to rethink. But at the moment, things are lined up pretty negatively, terribly. Against that, you have millions of consumers who've had a great experience and can talk directly to legislators and elected representatives. Is there any chance of, this is Neil again, any chance of some restrictions being lifted or loosened in the TPD3, such as e-liquid bottle sizes? I mean, I would really like to think so. I would like to think they could look at that, evaluate it, realize it was a total waste of time and that caused nothing but workarounds like short fills and other sort of things that serve no purpose whatsoever. But the history of easing up on stupid regulation in the tobacco control field is very poor. And the poster child for that is the ban on snus, which came in sort of in the late 80s, early 90s in stages, and is still with us today, even though we have massive evidence showing that Sweden is an outlier in reducing smoking, and that has led to reduced levels of cancer, heart disease, and COPD in the Swedish population. Despite the sheer wall of evidence that it's ludicrous to ban what has been so successful in Sweden and is so much less risky than smoking, snus remains banned and the EU continues to fight over keeping it banned in court. So I'm afraid I'm not optimistic. Who knows? Keep working on it with MEPs. They may be able to insert amendments in a TPD. There may be, a bag of amendments that could be put in as a compromise. So it's not impossible, but that won't be the basic instinct of the people doing the regulation. Let me just see. God, we've got a lot to go. Okay. Sorry. Let me. Look here. Why do you think certain politicians ignore the fact that adult smokers quit more successfully when vaping and largely over-exaggerate the teen vaping epidemic? Well, I think the reason is that what they say they are trying to do is not what they're actually trying to do. And one of my big concerns is that people say, yes, I'm in this for public health reasons, but they're not really. They're in this because they don't like any of this at all. They're repulsed by vaping, by nicotine use. They just think it should all go away. Their instincts are that this is all unnecessary. They don't like it. It's nothing to them. Why do we need any of this, they will say. And then the arguments about teen vaping and adult cessation are essentially tactical. So they start with their gut instinct. Their gut instinct determines what they feel about this, and then they fill in the reasoning that supports it after they've decided what their gut instinct is telling them. And that always draws them to focusing on teen vaping epidemics and underplaying the role of vaping in adult smoking cessation, underplaying the risk reduction, overplaying the uncertainties about long-term risks, denying any benefits at all, trying to suggest that flavors are purely directed to kids, that all the marketing is directed to kids when it isn't. That's obvious. So that's the reason, I think. They've got different objectives, and their objectives are essentially those of a nicotine prohibitionist. They want a nicotine-free society. They'll never get it. They shouldn't even want it. They should be focused wholly on the objective of reducing major disease and premature death if they were coming at this from a public health point of view, but they're not. A lot of them also have other objectives. So you could list the objectives. Am I trying to improve welfare, reduce major harms? Am I trying to ban nicotine? Am I trying to ban tobacco? Am I trying to ban smoking? Am I trying to protect bystanders from the effects of smoking? Am I trying to kill off the tobacco industry? For some of them, that's a really important objective. So when you get down to it, it gets down to what the concealed underlying objectives are. Why doesn't vaping get a foothold in Japan? Why I think the reason is that vaping is essentially banned. They banned e-cigarettes or made them classed as medical devices, and so it never actually got a toehold. The other reason I think is that the marketing environment is relatively liberal, and therefore it's been possible for companies like BAT and PMI and Japan Tobacco to market the heated tobacco products to the Japanese smoker population. The other thing is that these products give a sensation. I've never tried it myself, so I have no idea of first-hand experience, but these give an experience that is closer to smoking in several important respects. And therefore the switch involves giving up less for smokers. And therefore that might be a reason why it's been particularly popular in Japan. Marcus, another one. Recommendations by WHO experts are ludicrous. I agree. I've heard that UK MPs are putting pressure on Boris Johnson to withdraw, reduce funding to WHO. We've kind of dealt with that one, I think, Marcus, in earlier questions. There's MP, to be clear, MPs, a group of MPs are pressing the government to take action. That doesn't mean the government agrees with them or will take action or will take the action that the MPs are suggesting. Right, the Skier, hang on, have I missed one? Yeah, this is anonymous. The Skier report on vaping has been described as a tragedy for public health by the World Vapers Alliance. I don't know if that was today, but it probably is. Have you had a chance to form an opinion on it? Well, I'll be honest, I haven't had a chance to read it today. The new version, the final version is out, but I gather it doesn't differ that much. There's a few things have been softened compared to the preliminary report, but the basic structure is the same. My main concern about that report is that it's absolutely useless as a way of informing policy, because what you really need to understand is the perspective that I put forward earlier. How do these products overall displace smoking? How do they work to quit smoking? There's no point in having a big report on the risks of vaping if you're not comparing them to the risks of smoking and the effectiveness that these products have in displacing smoking and therefore causing a public health benefit. And that framework was entirely absent from the preliminary Skier report. And at first glance, I would say it was entirely absent from the final report, but I haven't had a chance to digest it yet. Let's see, we got here one from Angel. Any insight into how FDA's PMTA process will play out in the US? It seems like that will affect global markets. I don't know. I think, well, the interesting thing in the US is it's quite amusing in some ways, because the anti-tobacco campaigners have campaigned for years to get the FDA to regulate tobacco products and now vaping products. And I think there was an underlying strategy there that they weren't being totally honest about, because all they really wanted to do was get the FDA to put loads of bureaucratic barriers in the way of these products coming to market. The interesting thing has been their reaction when FDA has approved a product. They've gone basically berserk, and they've called it all out as if it's all wrong and everything. So in particular, the modified risk tobacco product approval that PMI received for the IQOS product, where they could talk about the fact that the exposures of toxicants were greatly reduced. That sent them all off the deep end, because that wasn't the idea. Wasn't the idea that the FDA would ever approve anything. It was only the idea it would block things. Okay, so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the dual PMTA, for example. So the dual PMTA is going through the FDA's grinder at the moment. The anti-tobacco groups are so spooked by it that they've written their own letter that's just gone in yesterday to FDA saying, don't approve this, don't approve this, don't approve this, we disagree with it. But of course, FDA itself is in the middle of a scientific review of what is essentially a confidential application. And I think that tells you all you need to know about what the groups want. They don't want FDA to find that any of these products are appropriate for the protection of public health, which is the standard that FDA uses, because that blows up their narrative big time. You know, what do these lunatic sort of Bloomberg funded groups do when you have an e-cigarette on the market that the FDA says is appropriate for the protection of public health? What can they do? It breaks their whole narrative. So they're determined that that shouldn't happen. I don't actually think there's much sign of the FDA approach catching on worldwide, because it's so incredibly resource intensive. Much more likely, I think, is that EU measures will be picked up, or Canadian, New Zealand measures will be picked up by WHO and used to set norms internationally, alongside the sort of simplest of all thing in their mind anyway, of having prohibitions. Let's go on a bit. Hang on, that was Angel. Marcus, are you proud of the UK's stance on vaping in comparison to that of the US and EU? Do you feel more can be done on the home shores? Actually, I am very proud. In fact, I had a little swelling of pride this morning when I read on the BBC that researchers at the University of East Anglia, led by Caitlin Knowley, are going to trial giving free cigarette starter packs to people coming into hospital accident emergency. Now, you can't ever smoke in accident and emergency or any hospital, but you've actually got people in a potential teaching moment. You know, they're desperate to smoke, they're desperate for the nicotine, they're all kind of traumatized because something awful's happened to them. Why not use that moment to see if an e-cigarette works for them? What a brilliant idea. I was so impressed. I'm so impressed and proud that this kind of thing is going on in Britain. I just wish it was going on in other countries to the same sort of extent. There are good things going on in other countries. It's not all Britain. There's been progress in a number of places, New Zealand, Philippines. Some very good stuff has happened in France. What we want to do is try and pull all the good practice together and try and get a feel for what's actually happening. But yeah, to answer the question, I am proud. I'm proud of the group of academics that stand behind this, the way Public Health England, the Royal College of Physicians and the other Royal Colleges have stood up behind it. I'm proud of my former employer, Ash, and the way Deborah Arnott, and a lot of people get angry with her, but she's done a brilliant job behind the scenes, getting people on side for tobacco harm reduction. I'm proud of the way the whole UK system has responded, and I think it's a lesson to lots of other governments. Right, coming up to the very last couple of questions, and I'll have to stop now, I think. Political issues on vaping across the EU and US from top-level government. Actually, I don't think it's top-level government. I think top-level government, in my experience, and it's certainly at the very top in Britain, the Prime Minister and Cabinet Secretary was strongly behind vaping back in, say, 2015. David Cameron was pro-vaping, and Sir Jeremy Haywood, the Cabinet Secretary, was pro-vaping. At the very highest levels of policy making, people see things in a much simpler terms. There's innovation has happened. It's a low-risk product. It can displace smoking. What the hell's not to like? Why are we spending, you know, billions on the NHS when the marketplace can solve our problems for us? That's how senior officials, senior government employees, senior ministers think. Is people down in the weeds that go for the sophistry because they don't like what it means for their career and their life's work. And that's what's been getting in the way, I think, and the money coming in from people like Bloomberg. Right, final question in the last minute. With vaping levels leveling off in the UK, how do you think the government should address the problem? Okay, well, we're going to put forward working with the New Nicotine Alliance. If you're a UK consumer, you must join them. If you're a European, you must join a consumer organization, and they'll be part of the European Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates. So that's a quick plug. Make sure you're in a consumer organization. We've got a load of ideas we put forward in a letter in October to the British government, what the UK could do post-Brexit. We're going to follow up on that with a range of proposals, incentivizing GPs, getting a stronger tie-up between vape stores and smoking cessation services and GPs and the NHS, better risk communication, getting the chief medical officer to stand behind these things, lifting the ban on snus, removing the ban on advertising smoke-free tobacco products because they're an important part of the story, better warnings, pack inserts, government-approved messages that could be used by any company, like, for example, e-cigarettes are not without risk, but they're very much less harmful than smoking. Why shouldn't the government approve a message like that and allow every company to put that on an advert or a pack insert or on a pack? That would change the game. Pack inserts in cigarettes. Why shouldn't we have a message in every cigarette pack that says, hey, have you tried vaping? If the tobacco companies are up for it, why not put a voucher in there for your first starter pack of a company vaping product? So there's a load of things that you could do by looking at the regulation, and I'm hoping we'll have something to say on that shortly, that we'll have a whole bunch of proposals. The UK is going to come out with proposals, in July to meet its ambitious target of reducing smoking to 5% by 2030. That requires twice the rate of reduction in smoking in the 2020s that we saw in the 2010s. And we already had quite a lot of vaping to help us in the 2010s. So something big, new, and different has to happen before we will get the kind of result that the government is looking for. All right, folks, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for your brilliant questions. Thanks for paying attention to me. I really wish I could see you all. I can't see anything. I really hope that in maybe a year's time we can all meet in person, have a proper conference and have a few beers or soda waters afterwards. But it's been great. The questions have been brilliant. I hope you found the presentation interesting, and good luck with the rest of the event. Thank you very much. Over and out.